Hello. Welcome to Grief is Real, Big, Better Shared, the podcast everyone needs to hear, but nobody wants to hear. We are back with part 2 of our conversation with our grieving spouses, John, Debbie, Michael, and Peria. So let's get right to it. So let's talk about people for a minute. I've probably had a lot of people. People are good. We need support. That's really one of the main factors that we look for in how someone is going to cope is their availability of support. But people sometimes need to learn how to support grieving people. And that's really something we want to come from this podcast is we want people to learn that it's about listening more than talking. But I'm just interested if you all could share a little bit about your experiences with people and maybe what was helpful or what was not. You don't have to tell us who said that what was not, but I think those things are important because
Yes.
I genuinely believe 99% of the time people think that they're being helpful. But I often tell people, really, until you walk in those shoes, you really don't know. And so let's talk about people.
I'll start.
Go for it, yeah.
For me, being ignored is the worst. And the people who want to have the best intentions and pretend as if my wife doesn't exist and that's all that's on my mind 24/7, the folks that let you talk and about experiences and everything, and you're not invisible with them and who you are now and who you were as a couple, that's worth just unbelievable amount right there.
And to kind of just interrupt to say something that Michael said, sometimes I hear that more from men than women. You know, that sometimes people will kind of be more willing to say things to a woman and let a woman express out of fear of making a man express, or what if I make him cry, and I'm always talking about you're not that powerful, you can't make people cry, but there is a lot within gender there, and I was curious if you had felt that.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
I think most people are good at heart when they come to you and they are interested in being helpful. And I think sometimes it's from a position of not knowing what to say or how to reflect or respond. And I think those people that allow your uncomfortable position, your grief, to enter in, and I think they're afraid of being uncomfortable. If they hear it and we say it out loud, what if it happens to them? And how will they then have to deal with that? It makes it real for someone else. Those people who say, I know how you feel. I'm sitting in this room and I'm telling you, I don't know how any of you feel. I only know how I feel. And I do think, as I said, I think it's well-intentioned, but those sorts of things are really difficult because you want to, certainly early on and even later on, sometimes you want to scream and say, no, you don't.
No.
You have no idea how I feel because I'm not sure how I feel.
Right.
And so how can you know how I feel?
Right.
But I do think that those, as you said, that will sit and listen, that are there, that are available on those days that are better, and certainly those days that are hard, are the ones who have offered me the most support.
And you know what? To that point, sometimes the what I've experienced is that, the looking back in those initial weeks and months, the colleagues, the friends who would come by and say, you know what? I just want to stop by for an hour so you can go get some groceries. You know what I mean? I'll sit with the kids, and you just go. Or just go for a run or something like that. That was always helpful. We didn't have to go and talk about a whole bunch of things emotionally or anything like that. It was just almost like a service to help me continue to function. One of the more difficult things, though, dealing with people is, sometimes your family can be the harshest, right?
I was waiting for that.
And I still deal with, relatives. I won't call their names out just in case they do listen to this. But and I know it came from a good place, but we have to be careful because, you know, I was told by relatives, I mean, close relatives, hey, you're still young, you know, you're gonna find someone else, you're gonna be back out there, and, you know, don't cut yourself off from, and I'm like, that's, you know, if you're gonna say something to me, say something in honor of LaShawn, you know, say something that, hey, I remember when you all went to this spot and had dinner. Help me remember something that, you know, I can hold on to and smile about. You know, don't try to, you know, shovel some more dirt, you know, on her gravesite, you know, and try to move me forward, you know, because that's not going to be helpful. And if anything, if I could tell anyone who listens to this, is that sometimes when you know, err on the side of silence as opposed to, you know, trying to find something to help force someone through a situation, because you, as you said, you just never know how someone else is feeling and how they're processing it. And so sometimes people, even the most well-intentioned people, can just be triggers, and it really, really can push things in a different direction.
Absolutely. And that whole trying to move you forward. We get so many calls from family members, and we need to do this, or you need to do this. I get told a lot and it's our job is not to try to move him forward. You know, and our whole philosophy at the center is we're going to join you where you are. It's a companioning model. So we join you where you are. We do want to nudge you in some direction sometimes, but it's at your pace, because it's not about moving you. And again, that's where I'm a believer 99% of the time. It's well intended, but we also have to learn how to let people be where they are. And grief is a natural response. People will naturally move in various directions with their grief, but we can't shove or push or have our own agenda. And I think that's something with a lot of grieving people that I hear, is they really find their source of support from people who come with no agenda. And those are the people that come with 2 ears open and one mouth shut.
I feel that hard. Everything you were saying, Michael, was nodding along, but I believe also in the goodness of people, and I've seen the goodness of people. I think that our culture is conditioned to talk about the positive and the happiness and the achievements, and we are incredibly uncomfortable talking about the bad and the sad and the hard. And I think that anything that people offer is coming from a place of, I don't like how I see you now, and I want to see you better. And there's nothing wrong with that. But where you see me now is where I'm going to be for a while. And
it's real.
Yes, yeah. And to tag along to what Michael said about the people, it was the doers for me, the people who just showed up, and I came home to a clean stack of laundry, or you know, a meal train, or those people that say there is absolutely nothing to say in this situation. It's just terrible. I'm sorry that you're going through this, but I do think it's important for us all to remember that we said in our house the sun will come up tomorrow, about a lot of things, and it's hard not to give up on that hope when you're in such a dark place. But all of those things that people say that are encouraging, I absolutely believe come from a good place. But it was really meaningful to people who could acknowledge just how dark and terrible and uncertain things are in that moment.
I think one thing that people struggle with, again, not having the shoes themselves, is they don't understand all the losses that come. So I said earlier, we lose this person we can see, touch, and feel, which is huge, but there's so many other losses. And I thought that would be something really important for us to talk about, especially in connection to the death of a spouse, is those other losses that maybe even caught you off guard. You know, sometimes I'll give you some examples that some people will talk about is a loss of self-esteem. Something practical is I lost the person who took the trash out every week. I have to like remember these role things, to the loss of intimacy. So many different losses. And I think, again, people don't understand that until they wear these shoes. So I was wondering if you all could talk about some of those losses or how you saw those other losses show up.
It touches everything. Everything. That was not necessarily, I certainly didn't know what to expect, but that was definitely the unexpected. Chores around the house that used to be such a pain were shared things. And now doing laundry is even harder because I'm not washing Barton's clothes. Just what do you want to watch on TV tonight? What do you, just the normal, the car in the driveway, just your person is gone. And it is equivalent to losing a limb. For me, it's the loss of shared experiences are so important to me. If certainly you do things for yourself for self-care, but the joy of living life comes to me through shared experiences. And every single time something that you want to do together comes up, you turn and he's gone. And it truly amazed me. You mentioned about how it changes you and you aren't who you were before. For me, is 100% accurate. I'm still me, but I'm not. Mm-hmm. But it's the loss of the joy of the shared experience. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But
future.
For sure.
Present.
Yeah.
Everything.
It has a way of touching everything. Tentacles.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sure this is a family-oriented show, so I won't go beyond G-rated when it comes to the intimacy part. We were very much as much in love in year 20 as we were in year 5. Mm. And the better thing was that we understood what being in love meant in year 20, way more than we did in year 5. And, our family dynamic is one in which, our older kids, we have a set of twins, 22. So they were able to get, we got them graduated from high school and off to college. And then we adopted our younger two, right? So the younger two were little. So we had this gap in between the demands of, graduating twins from high school with all of the events and everything that they had to do, band, basketball, everything they were doing. And once they graduated and went off to college, we got back to our relationship, and I would say the last 4 or 5 years of our marriage before LaShawn got sick and passed away, we dated again. Mm-hmm. We found each other again. It was more because you get into a family dynamic and you're more mom and dad, and you're more employee, and you got to make the money and keep the bills paid, and your roles are everything except for what brought you guys together initially. And we had gotten back to that. LaShawn was a fitness guru. She ran 5Ks and half marathons, and she got me in condition, and we did it. We ran across the world. We would go on date nights and things of that nature. And, I was always trying to impress her, and I felt like I needed, she was the motivation for me to do things with. My job takes me around the country and around the world. So, when I wasn't working, all of our time was spent with each other. Mm-hmm. And to lose someone that, was one of your primary motivating factors to show up for every day, mm-hmm. and to try to impress and to try to make her smile and to do things to spoil her. Without that, I had to really, really dig deep and figure out, okay, where am I now? Mm-hmm. And again, it goes back to the kids. Of course, I'm pouring all of that into them and back into myself now, and new relationships and things of that nature. But, she and I were together literally for half of our lives. Mm-hmm. We got married young, and we were married for 20 years and together for 23. And so we grew up together, basically. So there was someone else in the world that knew me better than I knew myself. And a lot of times you say that about people, but when you really have someone that resonates with, you know, and it's just things that I didn't even have to think about in terms of what was best for me. She always knew, and I always knew for her. And when you don't have that, it is like losing a limb. How do you go through life, you know, with your right hand chopped off? And, you know, you eventually figure it out, but, you know, that was the hardest thing is you know, and I had to learn. One of the things that Kelly would say is, you know, she was, one of my biggest breakthroughs was, you know, a couple of months after LaShawn passed, you know, I figured out how to do a French braid. So I washed and conditioned her hair one night. It took 4 hours.
That's incredible.
And I did a French braid. And when I did it, I took a picture and sent it to the family, and everybody was so proud. But when she looked at me,
good for you.
Thank you. When she looked at me and said, "Dad, you did a great job. Mommy will be happy." That was one of those crying moments, right?
Yes.
And I said, "It's okay. You know, it's okay to cry in front of her." But I like, it was certain, you realize what you can't do until you actually put the work in to try. Yeah. And it meant so much to her to see me try to do it. I could have just tied her hair in like a shoe knot and it would have been fine. Right?
That's right.
But yeah, I mean, those are things that you have to adjust to.
And Kelly shared that at camp because she was so proud that her dad had learned this. Yeah, those moments, that motivation. Yeah, I hear that. So finding that in other ways, but like you said too, I think you said in reference to kind of like the hand being cut off, you learn, you figure it out, but not overnight.
No.
It's still very uncomfortable.
Right. And you feel that pain, you know, if you listen or talk with folks who, you know, have lost a limb, you know, they'll talk about that phantom pain and how they can learn. And it's quite impressive, you know, some things that people are able to do, but it takes time and a lot of rethinking, retrying, right.
You mentioned the loss of dreams. That's Gail and I were together 34 years. And, you know, we just had a rhythm. Life was just, you know, understanding each other, knowing each other, and moving forward with what we wanted to do. But I found myself, after I lost him, with thoughts like, what if I get sick in the middle of the night? You know, there's no one here to help me if I need that. And coming up, one of the times of the day that was hardest for me was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, because I always got in my car, I always picked up my cell phone, and I called to see if you needed me to pick anything up. Or, I mean, there was just that connection that happened after work every day. So that was really a tough time. So that loss, I guess, of predictability, and then walking into a dark house, that was always so difficult for me to do, especially in the beginning. And I think that's one of those things to kind of bounce back to, that other people don't understand. You know, when you walk into that empty house or you sit down at that table with an empty chair, those are the kinds of things that remind you on a day-to-day basis that there's a loss and that there's a gap. So that whole piece of security, someone to depend on. And the other thing, just recently with talking with you all earlier about my retirement, I don't have that celebration with him. Yeah. You know, I have it with my family, and that's awesome, but it's not the same as having it with him. And we've had a granddaughter born since he died, and I know that, you know, she will never know anything of him that is real. Now, my grandson's different, but she will never know. I talk about him to her, and I bring him, you know, his name up to think anything that pops up with Steve, and I'll say, "Oh, you remember when Granddaddy did so and so," and try to keep that a little bit fresh in his mind. But I just remember thinking, you know, I hope Gail kissed you before he left heaven, you know, when she was born, because I hope he knew her then before she entered our lives, but we didn't have a chance to celebrate that together. So that's been a huge loss as well.
I lost everything that was normal in my life. Everything. But at her insistence, Claudia was the super retired homemaker. She enjoyed her retirement for 10 years, and I worked. And I went to work, and I brought home a paycheck. She took care of everything around the house, running everything. If we took a trip, she did the planning, bank accounts, everything. She was gone. I had nothing. I didn't have a debit card, password. And a friend of mine brought homemade lasagna, and she drove up to the house, and she says, all you have to do is, put this. I said, would you come in and show me how to use the oven? Because it was all gadgety. And so what I decided to do, I had a very accelerated transition. And basically now, almost everything in my life is different. My residence, how I do things, and I was able to, grasp that. But yet, absolutely everything changed. And it was good. I had quick transition now, but but going through it. And my biggest loss is in the evenings, because we pretty much had separate lives. She was retired and I was working, and we would always come together at dinner. So I am doing just fine. I don't think about grief and everything about 7 o'clock, between 7 and 9 o'clock at night in the empty house.
Yeah.
That's when it's tough.
Right. So you use that word everything that Perry has said. And I think that's so important for people to hear, because that is the reality of grief. It is a person we can see, touch, and feel, but it's everything else. Everything else. As we're kind of thinking about wrapping up, but I certainly want, if there's something else you really feel like we should discuss that you would have wanted to know, I want you to jump in and share anything. But what do you wish, or what do you feel like you know now that you wish you would have known in those early days? Something that we think it would be important for others to know about grief.
There's no right and wrong way to grieve.
Absolutely.
I got rid of her personal effects the first week I started transitioning, and the people who said, are you sure you're grieving?
Right.
And it's like, no, it's different for everybody. And when I have friends, and if they have not touched their spouses or loved ones' room or their articles for 7-10 years, I'm like, that's just as good as the first week. It's different for everybody.
Yes. That's something that comes up a lot, and you have to do, I'm a big believer that you wake up and and if you're doing it authentically and not on someone else's schedule. Yeah. So there's no wrong or right way to grieve. Yep.
And there's no set time for that grief. That I really wanted it over. I want out of this now. I'm over it. I'm ready. I want this to go away. And I talked with people who had lost a spouse and those kinds of things. And I really was searching for somebody to say, July of next year, you're going to be just fine. Yes. And there's no time limit on it. And so how deeply you grieve, and how long you grieve, is certainly up to the individual. But I would say, just as a word of encouragement, that I have, of course, I'm almost 6 years into this process and have done a lot of what I think is pretty hard work along the way. Yes. Now my grief has taken on a very different feel. Now I can embrace it in a way that it almost is welcoming, and that sounds really odd, because I got to a place where I avoided it initially, and then I came to a place where I felt like, my grief allows me to honor Gail in a different way. It allows me I can sit with it for a little bit, and it's not something that just tears me apart, but now it's just a way of remembering and understanding that grief that I still feel and will always feel, and it's not as intense as it was initially, but it reminds me of what we had and of the love that we had, and it gives me a place to put that for a little bit. So that piece of my journey I find very encouraging as I move forward.
And I believe that shows how hard you worked, because several of you in this room have said to me at some point, I don't want to do this, but I want to do all of it, and I want to feel all of it, and I want to hold all of it. And that's such a commitment to grief, and that's why we're here, is to do that. We have the honor of companioning you, but all four of you listening to you, I can hear the work that you have done, but what that really means is it's honoring your love stories. And that's what it is. It's not burying it, pretending it never existed. It's honoring it, it's holding it, it's loving your love story, which is what grief is.
It is. And I know, two things that came to mind that, I think back to and I reflect to is, number one, you got to forgive yourself, because you're going to carry, regardless if it's legitimate or otherwise, you're going to carry some level of regret or something that why didn't I do this differently? Or like, I remember early on, in the first days and weeks after LaShawn passed, for whatever reason, I don't know why God put that on my mind, but I remembered every argument that we had, right? And I was like, 2 years ago, I should have just said I'm sorry, right? Or the last week or whatever, why didn't I just, do this or do that differently? And that's part of relationships,
That's right.
One thing I did wish I could go back and do is, when she was diagnosed, it was pretty quick. The first diagnosis, once the test came back, it was stage 4. And it was already right, to the point where, she had one chemo treatment, and it turned out to be too powerful of a treatment, and it did more damage than it did help. And in those remaining weeks we had, I went into, okay, let's get to, Vanderbilt's hospital. Let's get to, all of these specialists, and let me get on the phone. And I wish, knowing how it ended up playing out, I wish I would have done less of that and just more of laying with her and holding her. And I mean, we did that, but fighting to try to keep her alive and make sure we got to every single physician and things that we could. She was happy to see me do that, and we did it together. But I wish I would have had 20 fewer phone calls and more time to just sit with her and hold her hand and do all of those things. So forgive yourself, in that process. And also give yourself the time and the space that you need. How you feel this week is going to be different than next week. And you might, this grief is not a linear process.
Exactly.
It's not. But if you do the work and you commit to doing the work, life has a way of pulling you forward. Whether it's your children, whether it's new opportunities, whether it's, you decide to move and relocate or take a different job or do something else, or maybe even eventually, in my situation, I never, I remember being in group therapy and grief share, and I would hear, some of the people who lost their spouse 5-6 years ago and they're remarried and in a relationship. And they used to talk about, yes, we can do this again. And I'm like, I'm never going to do that again.
Right.
And lo and behold, 2 years later, I'm in the process of doing that again. And, it's life has a way of I don't want to say replenishing you, because you will never replace what you had, but there are more chapters ahead of you. And I just found a way. I'm more like LaShawn now. And I feel like we've merged to become a new me with her. And I say this to everyone who meets me, is that you're not, the me you knew 5 years ago is different. I'm a different parent now than I was for my older kids. And it's because I've combined what she's taught me, what I've loved about her, what I love about her. I've incorporated that into me, and I'm moving forward in all ways of life with her as a part of that. So give yourself the space. Yes, give yourself the space. And forgive yourself, and just be cool with not everyone understanding who you are. I'm different. Okay, that's fine. Let's move on.
Yes. Yes, what
sorry.
Michael said. No, don't be sorry.
Yeah.
Yes. Barton, here we go, tears. Barton made me who I am. Even though we were only together for 2 years, there was so much that was right about it. He knew those things about me before I knew them about myself, which I think someone mentioned earlier. It was sort of a running joke where I would come up with this big revelation and tell him, and he would sort of nod and say, "I know." Oh, okay, thanks. Moving on. And this is just for me. It doesn't have to be anyone else's journey, but how could I not honor that? How could I not tell those stories? How could I not shout from the rooftops who he was and what he gave to me? And the merging, as you said, Michael, I am different because of him, and there's a lot of gratitude in that. And that's something that took me a while to finding. Gratitude has been very difficult. It's not that I certainly appreciate all of the things that people have done and what they have tried to do to lift me up and help, but it's sometimes just so hard to be grateful when you're so blinded by the loss. I'm getting there, and I want to be grateful for the life that I have, and I want to take advantage of those things. But when you see the opportunity that was taken from someone else, it's hard. But I'm trying to get to a place where I'm okay with that. And also the paradoxes of grief can make my head explode sometimes. But Barton gave me so much security. He had a plan for everything. Everything was thought out, and usually there was a spreadsheet involved. But and that there was so much comfort in that it's okay. I mean, we made decisions together, but I always knew that he had a plan. And on the flip side of that, the security that level of security that I lost when I lost Barton gave me a different level of security and confidence, because I do carry that with me. And I also, my priorities have completely rearranged, totally reshifted. Those other things that used to drive me crazy don't matter anymore. It just doesn't. Why are we arguing about this? Are we, saving the planet? Or, these little things that used to take so much energy now have been put into a completely different place of refocus. So it's strange when you lose that security, but you get security in the new you and the confidence that you feel about, I'm not going to take that from you anymore. I'm going to stand up for myself. I'm going to stand up for Barton. I'm going to, it's a new level of passion. And I've carried, I think I told Angela last week that if wanting something so badly inside of you, like bringing your person back, I want that so badly. If you could bottle that into an energy source, I promise you I could move a mountain. And having that energy that is physical, you feel like you're going to explode. Finding the place to direct that and it would be different for everyone, I imagine. But finding passion and finding ways, and especially if you can do it in a way that honors your person and honors the new you, then ultimately
And see, Angela, this is why this podcast and the work that you do and your staff, wonderful staff, does is so important, is because I can't imagine any place else in my life in the world right now where I can speak the way we've spoken.
I agree.
And feel comfortable. No one else could understand these kind of conversations and the things that we're sharing here. And frankly, there's not many other outlets out there for us to do that. And, I remember going through the early stages wondering, is there anyone out here who can understand anything I'm feeling right now? And, as a father of young children who usually, and one of the things you do as you do the work, you start reading so much stuff and you go online and then you see, wow, how unique your situation is, because 85% of widows are the woman who loses the man. And so I'm in the 15th percentile, right? And then, when you add in young children, school-age children, I'm probably in the 2 percentile from that standpoint. And all I wanted was to find someone who had been at least somewhere in my situation. And it was so difficult to find. So, one of the things I believe in is, be the change you hope to see.
That's right.
And I think what we're doing here today is, if nothing else, we're honoring the love of our lives, but also those who have to go on with life, trying to understand how they can cope with it too. So that's why this is so important. And I didn't hesitate at all to be a part of it. And I thank you guys for sharing too, because it's helpful. Just sitting here listening and sharing as well.
It is.
I agree. People don't talk about it enough.
Yes. Absolutely.
It happens to everyone, and it's just not talked about.
Right. Grief is the most universal experience there is, and we are all going to grieve. That's an absolute that we all can hang our hat on at some point in our lives, but it is the one topic people stray away from the most. And I think it's from a place of fear. So, Michael, you're right. I think settings like this, conversations like this, where people can tune in and maybe it helps them feel a little bit more normal in a very abnormal time of their lives, maybe give them some confidence of reaching out, for support, or finding good people to support them, because they are out there for sure. Is there anything else from the four of you that you feel like we haven't covered that you wanted to share? I mean, we could talk for weeks and months and ongoing. Don't get me wrong. There's a ton that I have purposely not gone into because I think this conversation has been so good. But is there anything you want to share?
As Michael was talking, I was thinking about, somebody told me, and it seems so true, I think for all of us, you're in a unique club that you didn't ask to join. And unless somebody's in that club, you can read about it and you can talk, but
you typically don't read about it until you're in the club.
until you're in the club,
right.
But it's different. So I think this is fantastic. Like you, Michael, I hope to see more work like this. I think it'd be helpful for people in whatever stage of grief.
I agree, and it's interesting to see people who are in a different place on the timeline too.
Yes.
Right.
And how even as very different as our experiences are, they're awfully similar.
One of the things that I think is interesting to remember is that even though each path, each journey is unique, there are some things that are very predictable about grief, and to just encourage those who are listening to seek out someone who can help you with that process of understanding what's normal. That it helped me so much to know that if I woke up and I felt like I had the flu, I was grieving. That was a normal part, that physical exhaustion to my response to my grief. It just helped me to know that, and once you helped me identify what that was, you gave me tools to then, whether it was breathe or rest or all the self-care tools that you have, just look for those and find someone who can help you with that, because it makes such a difference.
That's very important. And our first episode was really kind of an intro to grief, because people mostly think until you've been put in the club or given the shoes, as I say, you think grief equals sad. Well, grief equals headaches, fatigue, I can't remember where I put things. You have this whole brain component of grief. It may be anger or confusion to levels you've never had before. It may be questioning God. Grief is so very much more than sad. So I think that's a very, very important point is we have to really know what grief is before we can even begin to get to that coping piece.
Yeah, you talk about questioning God, and one of the last things I wanted to share too is that, I still do. And, I'm a deeply faithful person. I've been raised that way, and I've come to be even more spiritual and faith-based through this process. And I remember having nights where I'm angry and I'm like, God, why? Like the timing of this is just, man, and going through that and reading and having spiritual counseling as well, I eventually got to a place where it was like an epiphany. And what helps me right now, even as I still go through the emotional stages of it, is that I say to myself, God could have chosen 1 million different men on the face of the earth to walk LaShawn home. And he chose me. And he put her hand in my hand for the last stages of her life here with me. And I'm the lucky one, And once I understood that I needed to look at it that way, she wouldn't have chosen anyone else, and God chose me to be here with her through this, then I felt honored. And I felt, okay, this is how I serve. And you talked about gratitude, and having that gratitude for being in that space with the person that you lost, particularly a spouse. And then you can allow that merger to sort of happen, and that's what gets me through even to this day. As these little kids grow up, mommy's not going to be there for their graduations and for them to get their first car and all of those kind of things. And that breaks my heart, but in so many ways she will be there, and I think, she's going to be smiling down as she always is. But it just took me to get to that point where I'm like, okay, God, thank you for giving her, putting her in my life for this, and at this moment. And, you just have to switch up and find gratitude where you can, but it still doesn't take away the pain. It just sort of rechannels it a little bit. So
I like how you clarified that one doesn't necessarily replace the other.
Right.
That it is possible for them to both exist there. Yeah, absolutely. I am so grateful to know the four of you. I'm grateful to know Claudia and Gail and Barton and LaShawn through you. I certainly wish we knew them. And what I said at the beginning, I hope you know how much we all at the Centers for Good Grief mean, that we wish you absolutely never needed us. Again, from having my own family receive support there, I mean that, because I know what that loss, what it can feel like, and the weight and the ways that we have to work. But I also think it takes really courageous people armed with their love story to say, I'm going to hold this grief. I'm going to look at it. I'm going to learn when to set it down. I'm going to learn how to live with it. And I see and hear that in all four of you. And I think that you have been very inspirational and hopeful, I think, to our listeners today to know that, what we say all the time, that grief is real. It's big, but it's so much better shared. So thank you so much for sharing so much with us today.
Yes.
Thank you
Thank
for the
you.
opportunity.
Thank you.
Grief does heal. Let me say that again. Grief does heal. Grief demands attention and care. It needs support and patience. But grief does heal. Remember that your grief is a reflection of your love, and you are not alone. The world is full of grievers just like you. You can learn more about us at www.baptistgriefcenters.org. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, Baptist Centers for Good Grief, and you can get our podcast wherever you get your podcast. And remember, grief is real, big, and better shared. We'll talk soon.
I'm Diane Brockmeyer, the CEO of Mid-America Transplant, and we are honored to sponsor this episode of Grief is Real, Big, Better Shared. At Mid-America Transplant, we have the privilege of working with families across southern Missouri and Northeast Arkansas who choose to donate their loved ones' organs or tissues. While donation often brings families comfort, they are still heartbroken by their loss. We are proud to work with the Center for Good Grief and appreciate everything they are doing in the region to help bring healing to people who are coping with loss. Grief support is especially meaningful to me, as it was a tremendous help to my daughter, who lost her dad when she was 7 years old. 20 years later, she still recalls the positive, safe feelings she had with her grief support group. They understood her. Mid-America Transplant is inspired by life and by the donor families who give transplant patients a second chance. For more information about becoming a donor, visit sayyesgivelife.org.